Jake was 32 years old when his life changed on that rainy Friday night. He'd been divorced for about 2 years, and honestly, he was doing okay with it. Not great, but okay. He had his small apartment in the city, a decent job doing marketing for a tech company, and a routine that kept him busy enough not to think too much about how quiet his place was at night. The apartment building where he lived was one of those older structures with character. High ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and neighbors you actually ran into in the hallways. Jake liked it that way. After his divorce, he'd wanted something that felt alive, even if he was living alone. About 3 months before that Friday, a new neighbor moved in across the hall. Her name was Victoria, and the first time Jake saw her struggling with moving boxes, he'd offered to help. She had this warm smile that made him feel at ease instantly. They chatted while carrying boxes, nothing deep. Just the usual small talk about the building and the neighborhood. Victoria was 29, worked somewhere in finance downtown, and seemed like she had her life together. Jake noticed her, of course. How could he not? She had this quiet confidence about her, the kind that made you want to know more, but he kept his distance. After everything he'd been through with his marriage falling apart, he wasn't exactly jumping to put himself out there again. Over the next few months, they developed that friendly neighbor relationship. They'd say good morning when they ran into each other getting coffee. Sometimes they'd ride the elevator together and talk about the weather, or complain about the building's old heating system. Victoria would occasionally knock on his door to borrow something, sugar or a phone charger, and they'd end up talking in the doorway for 20 minutes. Jake started noticing she was doing that more often. The borrowing things. The conversations that lasted longer than necessary. There was this one time she invited him to grab coffee on a Sunday morning, and they ended up walking around the neighborhood for 2 hours. He remembered thinking she was probably just being friendly, making connections in a new place. He'd convinced himself that reading anything more into it would be stupid. His friends kept telling him he needed to get back out there, start dating again. But Jake wasn't ready. Or maybe he was scared. When you've been married and watched it all fall apart, there's this fear that sticks with you. What if you're the problem? What if you're not good enough? What if you mess it up again? These thoughts circled in his head constantly. That particular Friday had been a long day at work. Jake had a presentation that didn't go as planned. Spent an extra 2 hours fixing a campaign that his boss suddenly decided needed changes, and by the time he got home, he was exhausted. The rain had started around 6 in the evening, one of those heavy downpours that made you grateful to be indoors. He changed into his comfortable sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, ordered some Chinese food, and settled onto his couch to watch whatever movie he could find. This was his Friday night routine now. A year ago, that might have depressed him. Tonight, he was okay with it. Sometimes peace and quiet was exactly what you needed. Around 10 o'clock, he heard a knock at his door. Jake paused the movie, confused about who'd be knocking at this hour. Maybe old Mrs. Chen from downstairs needed help with something. She sometimes asked him to change light bulbs or reach things from high shelves. He walked to the door and opened it without checking the peephole. Standing there was Victoria, and Jake's brain needed a second to process what he was seeing. She was wearing a silk robe, the kind that looked expensive and elegant. Her hair was slightly damp, like she'd just gotten out of the shower. She had this look on her face that Jake couldn't quite read. Nervous? Determined? Both? "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I'm sorry to bother you this late." No, it's fine," Jake said quickly, suddenly very aware that he was in sweatpants and hadn't shaved in 3 days. "Is everything okay?" Victoria hugged herself slightly, and Jake realized she must be cold standing in the hallway in just a robe. "My apartment's heating system died about an hour ago," she explained. "I called the emergency maintenance line, but they said they can't come until tomorrow morning. It's freezing in there." "Oh, that's terrible," Jake said, already stepping aside. Come in. You'll catch a cold standing out there." She smiled gratefully and walked into his apartment. Jake closed the door, his mind racing. He'd had neighbors over before, but this felt different somehow. Maybe it was the late hour. Maybe it was the robe. Maybe it was the way his heart was beating a little faster than normal. "Let me make you some tea or something," Jake offered, heading toward his small kitchen. "You want coffee? Hot chocolate?" "Tea would be perfect," Victoria said, looking around his apartment. "I like what you've done with the place. It feels cozy." Jake laughed while filling the kettle. "Cozy is a nice way of saying I have like 3 pieces of furniture." It was true. His place was minimalist, partly by choice and partly because after the divorce he'd started fresh. New apartment, new things, trying to build a new life. Victoria sat on his couch, pulling her robe tighter around herself. "Sometimes less is more," she said. "My place is still half packed. I've been here 3 months and still have boxes I haven't opened." They fell into conversation easily, the way they always did. Jake brought her the tea and sat in the armchair across from the couch, keeping a respectful distance. They talked about work, about the city, about nothing important and everything at the same time. Victoria mentioned she'd moved to this building because she wanted a fresh start, and something in the way she said it made Jake think there was a story there. "Fresh start from what?" he asked gently. Victoria looked down at her teacup. "A relationship that wasn't working. We were together for 5 years, engaged for one of them. But sometimes you realize you're with someone because it's comfortable, not because it's right." Jake nodded, understanding that feeling more than she knew. "I get that. My marriage ended 2 years ago. We were together for 7 years total. Looking back, I think we stopped being right for each other somewhere around year 4, but we both just kept going through the motions." "Why did it end?" Victoria asked, then quickly added, "Sorry, you don't have to answer that. That's too personal." "No, it's okay," Jake said. He found that he wanted to tell her. "She left me for someone she worked with. Found out they'd been seeing each other for months before she told me. That part hurt more than the actual divorce, you know? The lying. Made me question everything." Victoria's eyes softened with sympathy. "That's awful. I'm sorry you went through that." They kept talking, and Jake noticed they'd been sitting there for over an hour. The rain continued beating against his windows, creating this cozy atmosphere that made the outside world feel far away. Victoria had relaxed, curling her legs under her on the couch. She looked comfortable, like she belonged there, and that thought both excited and scared Jake. He was attracted to her. That much was obvious and had been for a while. But more than that, he liked talking to her. He liked how she listened, really listened when he spoke. He liked her laugh and the way she tilted her head when she was thinking about something. But Jake had been hurt before, and jumping into something felt terrifying. "You know what's funny?" Victoria said suddenly, setting down her empty teacup. "The heating in my apartment isn't actually broken." Jake felt his heart skip. "What?" Victoria stood up slowly, and there was something different in her expression now. That nervous determination was back, stronger this time. "I lied. The heating works fine. I've been working up the courage to come over here for weeks now, and tonight I just decided to stop overthinking it." Jake stood up too, not sure what to say or do. His mind was spinning. "Victoria, I know this is forward," she continued, taking a step closer. "And maybe I'm reading this completely wrong, but I feel like there's something here between us. These past few months, every time we talk, I don't want it to end. I find excuses to run into you. I think about you way more than I probably should for someone who's just my neighbor." She reached up and slowly loosened the tie on her robe, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, Jake just stood there, completely frozen. His brain was trying to catch up with what was happening. Victoria stood in front of him, her hand on the tie of her robe, looking at him with an expression that mixed vulnerability and courage. The rain outside seemed louder suddenly, or maybe that was just his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then she let the robe slip off her shoulders. Jake exhaled, but not for the reason someone might think. Under the robe, Victoria was wearing an elegant black dress. Simple but beautiful. She wasn't trying to seduce him in the way his initial panic had assumed. She was just being honest, putting herself out there in a way that must have taken incredible courage. "I'm not leaving tonight," Victoria said quietly, her eyes never leaving his, "unless you want me to." Jake's mind was racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. Part of him wanted to close the distance between them right then, pull her close and let whatever was going to happen just happen. But another part of him, the part that had been hurt and spent 2 years rebuilding himself, was screaming caution, red flags, warning signs. This was too fast, too sudden. What if she regretted it tomorrow? What if this ruined the friendship they'd built? What if he wasn't ready for this? He did something that surprised both of them. He bent down, picked up her robe from where it had fallen, and gently placed it back around her shoulders. "Wait," he said softly. "Just wait a second." Victoria's face immediately flushed with embarrassment. "Oh God," she said, taking a step back. "I completely misread this, didn't I? I'm so sorry, Jake. I should go." No, that's not what I mean," Jake said quickly, reaching out but not quite touching her. Please sit down. Let me explain. Victoria looked uncertain, but she sat back down on the couch, clutching the robe around herself. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Jake sat down too, this time on the couch beside her, close but still leaving some space between them. I'm attracted to you, Jake said, and he watched Victoria's eyes flick up to meet his. Like, really attracted to you? And I think you're amazing. These past few months, you've been the best part of my days. When I see you in the hallway, my whole mood lifts. When we talk, I lose track of time. So you didn't misread anything. Then why did you... Victoria gestured vaguely at the robe. Because I don't want this to be just tonight, Jake said, surprised by his own honesty. If we do this right now, in this moment, I'm worried we'll both wake up tomorrow wondering what we did. I'm worried you'll regret it. I'm worried I'll mess it up somehow. Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You want to know the truth? I've been planning this for 2 weeks. I've rehearsed what I'd say. I picked out this dress specifically. I even had 2 glasses of wine before I came over here because I was so nervous. And you know what? I'm still terrified. Why? Jake asked. Because what if I'm not ready for this either? Victoria said, her voice cracking slightly. What if I'm just lonely and latching onto the first guy who's been nice to me since my breakup? What if I hurt you because I'm still messed up from my last relationship? Jake felt something shift in his chest. Here they were, 2 people who were attracted to each other, who clearly cared about each other, both terrified of taking the next step because they'd been hurt before. It would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. Okay, Jake said, making a decision. Here's what I think we should do. Let's go on a date. A real date. Tomorrow night. I'll pick you up. We'll go to dinner. We'll do this the right way, and then we'll see where it goes from there. No pressure. No expectations. Just 2 people getting to know each other. Victoria looked at him like he'd just said something in a foreign language. You want to date me? After I just showed up at your door at 10 at night and basically threw myself at you? I want to date you because you're brave enough to show up at my door and be honest about how you feel. Jake corrected. That takes guts. And I want to do this right because I think you might be someone special. And I don't want to mess it up by rushing. A slow smile spread across Victoria's face. That's possibly the sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me. Is that a yes to dinner tomorrow? Jake asked. That's a yes to dinner tomorrow, Victoria confirmed. They sat there on the couch, both suddenly shy, the intensity of the moment fading into something softer. Jake made them both more tea, and they talked for another hour about everything and nothing. They talked about their childhoods, their families, their dreams. Victoria told him about how she'd always wanted to learn piano but never had the time. Jake told her about the novel he'd been trying to write for 5 years but never seemed to finish. Around midnight, Victoria finally stood up to leave. They walked to the door together, and there was this charged moment where they stood facing each other in the doorway. Jake could see her apartment door directly across the hall. So close. They'd been neighbors all this time, just a few feet apart. Thank you, Victoria said quietly, for being respectful, for wanting to do this right. Thank you for being brave enough to come over here, Jake replied. They stood there for another moment, and then Victoria leaned in and kissed him. It was soft and brief, just a gentle press of lips, but it sent electricity through Jake's entire body. When she pulled back, she was smiling. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, Jake agreed. She walked across the hall to her apartment, and just before she went inside, she turned back and gave him a little wave. Jake waved back, then closed his door and leaned against it, his heart still racing. He didn't sleep much that night. His mind kept replaying the evening, the conversation, that kiss. He kept questioning his decision to slow things down. Had he done the right thing? What if she changed her mind by morning? What if she decided he wasn't interested after all? But underneath all those worries was something else. Excitement, hope, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, something good was beginning. Something worth taking the time to do right. Saturday morning, Jake woke up early despite his lack of sleep. He spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to decide what to wear. He hadn't been on a real first date in years. Everything felt too casual or too formal. He finally settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, trying to look nice without looking like he was trying too hard. He made a reservation at a small Italian restaurant he'd heard good things about. Somewhere nice but not intimidating. He wanted Victoria to feel comfortable. At 6 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Still on for tonight?" "Absolutely," he typed back. "I'll pick you up at 7? "Perfect." "I'm nervous." Jake smiled at his phone. "Me too." The hour between 6 and 7 felt like the longest hour of Jake's life. When 7 o'clock came, Jake stood outside his apartment door, holding a small bouquet of flowers he'd picked up from the shop downstairs. His hand was actually shaking slightly as he raised it to knock on Victoria's door. He felt like a teenager again, nervous and excited and terrified all at once. The door opened and Jake forgot how to breathe for a second. Victoria was wearing a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair styled in soft waves. She looked beautiful, but what really got him was her smile. It was genuine and warm and maybe a little nervous too. "These are for you," Jake said, holding out the flowers. Victoria took them, her smile growing wider. "They're beautiful. No one's brought me flowers in years. Give me just a second to put these in water." She disappeared back into her apartment for a moment and Jake waited in the hallway, trying to calm his racing heart. When she came back out, she'd grabbed a light jacket, and together they walked down to the building's entrance. The restaurant was a 15-minute walk away, and they talked easily as they went. The nervousness from earlier seemed to fade with each block they walked. By the time they arrived, Jake felt more relaxed. This was Victoria, the woman he'd been talking to for months. The same person who'd made him laugh in the elevator and borrowed his phone charger half a dozen times. The dress and the flowers didn't change who they were to each other. The restaurant was small and cozy, with dim lighting and candles on each table. They were seated in a corner booth, which gave them privacy while still being part of the warm atmosphere around them. Jake had worried about awkward silences, but they never came. Conversation flowed as naturally as it always had between them. "So tell me something about yourself that I don't know," Victoria said after they'd ordered. "Something real." Jake thought about it while sipping his water. "I'm scared all the time," he admitted. "About everything. My job, my life, relationships. After my marriage ended, I realized I'd been going through life on autopilot for years. Now I'm awake but terrified I'm going to mess everything up." Victoria reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "I get that. I really do. After my engagement ended, I spent 6 months barely leaving my apartment except for work. I was scared to try anything new, scared to meet new people. Moving to a new building was this huge step for me." "What made you do it?" Jake asked. "My sister," Victoria said with a small laugh. "She basically staged an intervention. Told me I couldn't hide forever. She's the one who found the apartment listing, helped me move, and kept checking in to make sure I was actually trying to live again and not just exist. Their food arrived, and they kept talking between bites." Victoria told him about growing up with 2 sisters, always being the middle child, always trying to keep the peace between her older sister's ambition and her younger sister's rebellion. Jake talked about being an only child, how that shaped him to be independent but sometimes lonely. "Is that why you became a writer?" Victoria asked. "The novel you mentioned. Was it because you were lonely as a kid?" "Probably," Jake admitted. "Books were my best friends growing up. Still are in a lot of ways. Writing felt like a natural extension of that. Though I'm not sure I can actually call myself a writer when I haven't finished anything in 5 years." "Why haven't you finished it?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. Jake had to think about that. "Fear, mostly. If I finish it and it's bad, then I have to face the fact that maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. If I never finish it, it can stay perfect in my head." "That's a sad way to live," Victoria said gently. "Always protecting yourself from failure by never really trying." She was right, and Jake knew it. "What about you? The piano thing you mentioned. Why haven't you learned?" "Same reason probably. Fear that I'll be bad at it. Fear that I'll start and quit like I quit everything else. I have this habit of getting excited about things and then abandoning them when they get hard." They looked at each other across the table. 2 people who'd been hurt and were scared of being hurt again, both trying to figure out how to be brave. "We're kind of a mess, aren't we?" Jake said with a laugh. "A complete mess," Victoria agreed. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're a mess together." After dinner, they walked back toward their building slowly, neither of them quite ready for the night to end. They stopped at a small park along the way and sat on a bench, watching people walk by with their dogs. "I'm really glad you came over last night," Jake said, "even if it was terrifying." "I'm glad you stopped me," Victoria replied. "This feels better. More real." They sat close together on the bench, and Jake found himself studying her profile in the streetlight. There was something about her that made him want to be brave, want to try again despite his fears. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said, turning to face him. "When your wife left, how long did it take before you stopped blaming yourself?" The question hit Jake harder than he expected. "I'm not sure I have stopped," he admitted. "I still wonder sometimes what I could have done differently. If I'd been more attentive, more exciting, more something." "My therapist told me something that stuck with me," Victoria said. "She said that sometimes relationships end not because anyone did anything wrong, but because people grow in different directions. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you failed." "You're seeing a therapist?" Jake asked. Victoria nodded. "Have been for about 6 months. After my engagement ended, I realized I needed help processing everything. Best decision I ever made." "I did therapy too," Jake said. "For about a year after my divorce. It helped a lot. Made me realize a lot of patterns I'd been repeating." They kept talking, opening up about their struggles, their therapy experiences, their fears about starting something new. And somewhere in that conversation, Jake realized something important. He'd been so scared of getting hurt again that he'd forgotten relationships weren't just about avoiding pain. They were about connecting with someone, sharing your life with them, growing together. By the time they got back to their building, it was almost midnight. They rode the elevator up together, standing close but not touching, both aware of the tension building between them again. When they reached their floor and walked to their doors, they stood in the hallway for a moment, neither wanting to say goodnight. "Do you want to come in?" Victoria asked softly. "Just to talk more. I'm not ready for tonight to end yet." Jake hesitated for only a second before nodding. "I'd like that." They went into Victoria's apartment, which Jake had never actually been inside before. It was similar to his in layout, but felt completely different. She had art on the walls, plants in the corners, throw pillows on the couch. It felt lived in and warm. They sat on her couch closer than they'd been all night and kept talking. About everything and nothing. About their hopes and dreams and fears. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, they both fell asleep there on the couch, Victoria's head on Jake's shoulder, his arm around her. When Jake woke up in the morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows. Victoria was still asleep beside him, and for the first time in 2 years, Jake felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. After that night, something fundamental shifted between them. Not in a bad way, but in a deeper way. They'd both shown their vulnerabilities, their fears, their messy, complicated truths, and neither had run away. That created a foundation stronger than Jake had experienced in any previous relationship. Victoria started being more open about her mental health. When she was having a bad day, she'd text Jake and let him know. Sometimes she needed space and he'd give it to her. Sometimes she needed company and he'd come over and just sit with her. Not trying to fix anything, just being there. Jake learned that sometimes the most helpful thing he could do was simply exist alongside her, without trying to make her feel better. On his part, Jake opened up more about his own struggles. He told her about the days when he still felt like a failure, because his marriage had ended. He told her about his fear that he'd never finish his novel because finishing it would mean risking rejection. He told her about the loneliness that sometimes hit him out of nowhere, even when he was surrounded by people. They started going to a couples counselor together, not because their relationship was in trouble, but because they both wanted to build something healthy from the start. Their counselor helped them develop better communication skills, helped them understand each other's triggers and needs, helped them build tools for navigating difficult times. Jake also started writing again, really writing, not just thinking about writing. Victoria had encouraged him one evening, telling him that he'd regret it if he never tried. So he started setting aside an hour each morning before work. Just him and his laptop and his half-finished novel. It was hard at first, facing all those words he'd written years ago and trying to pick up the thread. But gradually it started flowing again. Victoria signed up for piano lessons. She'd come home from her weekly lesson excited or frustrated or both, and she'd tell Jake about what she was learning. She wasn't very good yet, but she was trying, and Jake loved watching her light up when she talked about it. They celebrated small victories together. Victoria went 2 weeks without a panic attack. Jake finished a chapter of his novel. George the plant actually started looking healthy after Victoria set reminders on her phone to water him. These weren't big things, but they mattered. Of course, it wasn't perfect. They had arguments like any couple. Victoria would get frustrated when Jake tried to solve her problems instead of just listening. Jake would get hurt when Victoria withdrew instead of talking to him. But they'd learn to come back together, to talk through things, to apologize when they needed to. About 6 months after that rainy Friday night when everything started, they were sitting on Jake's couch watching a movie. It was one of their regular evenings, nothing special, just comfortable companionship. "You know what I realized today?" Victoria said during a quiet moment in the film. "What?" Jake asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm happy," she said simply. "Like genuinely happy. I haven't felt this way in years. Maybe ever." Jake pulled her closer. Yeah, Victoria confirmed. "I know I still have bad days. I know I'll probably always struggle with anxiety, but for the first time I feel like I'm not just surviving. I'm actually living." "I know what you mean," Jake said. "I spent so long after my divorce just going through the motions. Now I wake up and I'm excited about the day, about seeing you, about writing, about all of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the movie playing forgotten in the background. Jake didn't move for a few minutes after waking up. He just lay there on Victoria's couch, feeling the weight of her head on his shoulder, listening to her breathing. It was Sunday morning and the city outside was quiet. Through the window he could see the sun painting the buildings golden and everything felt peaceful. Victoria stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a second she looked confused about where she was. Then her eyes found his and she smiled. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," Jake replied. "Sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep here." "Don't apologize," Victoria said, sitting up and stretching. "That was the best sleep I've had in months." There's something comforting about falling asleep next to someone. They made coffee together in her small kitchen, moving around each other easily despite the tight space. Jake noticed the little details of her life. The pictures on her fridge of her and her sisters. The collection of coffee mugs, each one different and probably with its own story. The plant on the windowsill that looked like it had seen better days. "That's George," Victoria said, noticing him looking at the plant. "I'm a terrible plant parent. I keep forgetting to water him." "George needs help," Jake agreed, examining the drooping leaves. They spent the morning together, doing nothing and everything. They made breakfast, talked more, laughed more. Around noon, Jake finally went back to his own apartment to shower and change. But an hour later, Victoria knocked on his door asking if he wanted to go for a walk. This became their pattern over the next few weeks. They'd spend evenings together after work, sometimes at his place, sometimes at hers. They'd have dinner, watch movies, just talk. On weekends, they'd explore the city together, finding little coffee shops and bookstores and parks they'd never noticed before. Jake introduced Victoria to his favorite used bookstore, a cramped little place downtown where the owner knew him by name. Victoria showed Jake her favorite spot in the city, a rooftop garden that few people knew about where you could see the entire skyline. They were building something real, something that felt solid and genuine. Jake found himself thinking about her constantly. At work, he'd catch himself smiling at his desk for no reason. His co-workers noticed and teased him about it, but he didn't mind. But around the 3-week mark, something changed. Victoria started seeming distant. She'd cancel plans occasionally, saying she was tired or had work to catch up on. When they were together, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Sometimes Jake would catch her staring off into space with this worried expression on her face. At first, Jake tried not to overthink it. Everyone needed space sometimes. Everyone had bad days. But as another week passed and the distance grew, he couldn't help but feel that familiar fear creeping back in. Was she having second thoughts? Had she realized he wasn't what she wanted? Was there someone else? The thoughts consumed him more than he wanted to admit. He'd lie awake at night analyzing every conversation, every interaction, trying to figure out what had changed. He remembered his marriage, how his wife had pulled away before finally admitting she'd been seeing someone else. The patterns felt too similar, too familiar. One evening, after Victoria had canceled their dinner plans for the 3rd time that week, Jake decided he couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty was worse than any truth could be. He needed to know what was going on, even if the answer was something he didn't want to hear. He texted her. "Can we talk? I'll come over." Her response came a few minutes later. "Okay." That single word sent his anxiety through the roof, but he forced himself to walk across the hall and knock on her door. When Victoria opened it, she looked tired. like she hadn't been sleeping well. "Hey," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Hey," Jake replied, walking into her apartment. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, and Jake hated it. He hated that they'd gone from being so comfortable together to this strained distance. "What's going on, Victoria?" Jake asked, deciding to just be direct. "These past couple weeks, you've been different, distant, and I need to know if you're having second thoughts about us, because if you are, I'd rather you just tell me." Victoria's eyes widened. "Second thoughts? Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think," Jake said, his frustration bleeding into his voice. "You won't talk to me. You keep canceling plans. When we are together, you're somewhere else mentally. What am I supposed to think?" Victoria sat down heavily on her couch, putting her face in her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you something, and I keep chickening out because I'm scared you'll think I'm too messed up or too much work." Jake felt his heart sink. "Tell me what?" "I have anxiety," Victoria said, the words coming out in a rush. "Like clinical anxiety and depression. I've been dealing with it on and off since college, but it got really bad after my engagement ended. That's why I started therapy. That's why I moved here, trying to start fresh. And I thought I was doing better, I really did. But these past few weeks, I've been having bad days again." She wiped at her eyes. And Jake sat down next to her, his anger and fear dissolving into concern. "Some mornings I wake up and I can barely get out of bed," Victoria continued. "Everything feels overwhelming. I cancel our plans because I don't want you to see me like that. I don't want you to think I'm broken or that you have to fix me. And I'm terrified that if you know how bad it gets sometimes, you'll decide I'm not worth the effort." Jake felt something break open in his chest. All this time, he'd been worrying about her pulling away, about her not wanting him, when really she was struggling and trying to hide it to protect him. "Victoria, look at me," he said gently. She raised her eyes to meet his. "I don't think you're broken." "Having anxiety and depression doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. But it's not fair to you," Victoria said. "You didn't sign up for this. We've only been together a few weeks and I'm already a mess. Can I tell you something?" Jake asked. "After my divorce, I was a complete wreck. I was in therapy, but I was also on medication for a while because I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I had panic attacks in grocery stores. I'd have days where I couldn't get out of bed either. It took me over a year to feel even somewhat normal again." Victoria stared at him. "You never told me that." "Because I was scared too," Jake admitted. "Scared you'd think I was weak or damaged. We've both been hiding parts of ourselves because we're afraid the other person won't be able to handle it." They sat there in silence for a moment, both processing this revelation. "I don't need you to be perfect," Jake said. "I just need you to be honest with me. When you're having a bad day, tell me. When you need space, tell me. When you need support, tell me. We can figure this out together." "What if I can't be what you need?" Victoria asked quietly. "What if you're exactly what I need?" Jake countered. "Someone real. Someone honest. Someone who's been through hard things and is still trying." Victoria leaned into him and Jake wrapped his arms around her. She felt small and vulnerable in his embrace, and he realized how much courage it must have taken for her to tell him all of this. "I'm scared," she whispered against his chest. "Me too," Jake said. "But maybe we can be scared together."